Something grabbed my arm in that bathroom, and I still have the bruises to prove it. But first, let me back up and explain. I've been working custodial at Whitmore College for 12 years, and I've always been on the day shift. It's good steady work, decent benefits, and I like the students. But last month they asked me to take on this special project in Hartwell Hall. That's the old humanities building. They're renovating the whole east wing over winter break, but first they needed someone to strip and refinish all the hardwood floors in the classrooms. That means union overtime rates, and I work alone at night when the building's empty. Of course I said yes. Hartwell's this old brick building from the 1920s. Used to house the English and philosophy departments before they moved everyone to the newer complex. Now it's just mostly storage and a few graduate seminars. The East Wing has been basically abandoned for 2 years, except for one sociology class that meets there Tuesday mornings. First night, October 15th, I'm setting up my equipment in room 204. It's around 10 p.m. Building's been empty since 6. I've got my orbital sander, chemical stripper, all the gear I need to get these floors back to bare wood. The room still has those old-style desks, the kind with the attached chairs that squeak when you move them. I'm about 20 minutes into sanding when I hear it. Chalk on a chalkboard. Some of you might not know, but it has a distinctive scraping sound. It was coming from across the hall in 207. I shut off the sander and listen. The sound stops. I figure it's just the building settling, old pipes making noise, something like that. These places are full of weird sounds at night. But then it starts again. Long drawn-out strokes, like someone's writing sentences, not just random marks. I walk across the hall and flip on the lights in 207. The room's empty. Then I remember, because I'm that old, there's no chalkboards. Hasn't been for years. The whole wall is just painted cinder block, where they removed the old slate boards when they updated the building. But I could swear that sound was coming from exactly where a chalkboard would have been. This kept happening over the next few weeks. Always the same pattern. I'd be working alone, hear the chalk sounds from 207, go check and find nothing. Sometimes the sounds came from other rooms too. 204, 211, and 209. Always rooms that used to have chalkboards but didn't anymore. Then the jacket showed up the second week. There I am, refinishing the floors in 211. And when I come back from my break, there's this tweed sport coat draped over the lectern. Brown tweed with leather elbow patches, the kind professors wore back in the 50s. Looked expensive but old-fashioned as hell. I figured someone left it behind, so I took it to campus security lost and found, described it to Officer Martinez, and she logged it in their system. 3 days later, same jacket's back on the same lectern in 211. I'm sure it's the same one. There's this small moth hole near the left pocket that I remembered. I take it to lost and found again. Martinez looks at me weird but takes it. This happened 5 times over 2 months. Same jacket appearing on lecterns in different classrooms when I'm not looking. Martinez started joking that maybe it belonged to the ghost of Christmas past or something, but I could tell she was getting annoyed. The bathroom situation was worse. The men's room at the end of the East Wing corridor stays cold at night. I'm talking cold enough that you can see your breath sometimes. During the day it's normal temperature, but after 8 p.m. it's like walking into a freezer. The heating vents blow warm air, but it doesn't seem to make any difference. I mentioned it to maintenance and they checked the HVAC system twice. Everything's working fine, they said. No blockages, good airflow, thermostats reading normal. But every night I went in there, it was the same bone-deep cold that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The worst part was the mirrors. Old building like that, they've got these big rectangular mirrors over the sinks, probably original from the 20s. Sometimes when I'd go in there to check supplies or clean, I'd catch movement in the peripheral vision. Just for a split second, like someone stepping out of frame. But when I'd look directly, there was nothing. November 18th was when things really took off. I'm working late, around midnight, trying to finish the last classroom before the weekend. I hear footsteps in the hallway, slow and steady. Dress shoes on hardwood, not the soft rubber soles that students wear. The footsteps stop right outside 207. Then the chalk sounds start again, but louder this time, more aggressive, like someone's writing frantically, pressing hard enough that the chalk is breaking. I grab my flashlight and head across the hall. The sound stops the moment I touch the door handle, like they always do. I push the door open and immediately smell something I hadn't noticed before. Old cigarette smoke and aftershave. The kind of musty smell you get from clothes that have been stored too long. The room's empty, but there's chalk dust on the floor where the blackboard used to be. Fresh white dust, like someone had just finished erasing something. That's when I decided to do some research. I spent my lunch break in the college library going through old newspapers, yearbooks, anything about Hartwell Hall. Most of it was mundane stuff, budget meetings, faculty changes, and building renovations. But then I found the article from October 23, 1961. Whitmore Beacon, the college paper. It said, English professor found dead in Hartwell Hall. The story was buried on page 3 and pretty brief. Professor Edmund Thorne, 42, discovered in the men's bathroom by a student early Monday morning. Apparent suicide. The article mentioned that Professor Thorne had been facing personal difficulties and was under investigation by college administration. I dug deeper and found a follow-up story from 2 weeks later. Turns out Thorne had been having an affair with a graduate student, Margaret something or other. The name was partially obscured in the microfilm. The administration found out, was planning to fire him and make it public. In 1961, that kind of scandal would have destroyed his career, maybe his whole life. The article mentioned that Professor Thorne was known for his old-fashioned dress, always wore tweed jackets and carried chalk in his pockets, because he preferred writing on the board to using the newer overhead projectors. His colleagues described him as passionate about teaching, the kind of professor who would stay late grading papers and preparing lectures. He taught in room 207. The night I found that article, I went back to work with a different perspective. The building felt heavier somehow, like the air was thicker. I was refinishing the last section of floor in 209 when I heard the chalk sounds again from 207. But this time I didn't go check. Instead, I kept working and listened. The sounds went on for almost an hour. Long periods of writing, then pauses, then frantic scratching like someone was erasing and starting over. It sounded desperate. Around 2 a.m., I packed up my equipment and headed for the bathroom to wash my hands before leaving. The cold hit me like always, but this time there was someone standing at the far sink. Not clearly, more like a shadow that was denser than the darkness around it. Wearing what looked like a jacket and tie, leaning over the sink like he was washing his hands or splashing water on his face. I stood there for a few seconds, watching the shadow move. Then it straightened up and turned toward me, and I felt this overwhelming sense of shame and panic that wasn't mine, like emotions that belonged to someone else were flooding into my head. That's when it grabbed me, not the shadow. That faded away the moment it turned, but something invisible wrapped around my left arm just above the elbow and squeezed hard enough to leave marks. Then shoved me backward into the wall hard enough that I hit my head on the paper towel dispenser. I got out of there fast and didn't go back until the next Monday morning, when the day custodian was there too. I showed him the bruises on my arm, perfect finger marks, 4 on one side and a thumbprint on the other. The renovation project finished 2 weeks ago. I'm back on day shift now, working other buildings. But I drive past Hartwell Hall sometimes, and I always look up at those windows in the east wing. And sometimes late in the afternoon, when the light hits just right, I swear I can see someone standing at the window of room 207, looking out at the campus like he's waiting for something that's never gonna come. Maybe that's only my imagination, though. I was in England for a week in October, visiting Ava and Archie, who I'd met in an online photography group about 3 years back. We'd been chatting regularly, became genuine friends, and they'd been inviting me to visit since forever. Finally, I had some vacation time and cheap flights lined up, so I booked a trip to Cheltenham where they live. Ava recommended this small hotel in town because it was walking distance from their flat and had character. She wasn't wrong about the character part. This place was old school British, all dark wood paneling and floral carpets that probably hadn't been changed since the 80s. The kind of hotel where you expect to find elderly guests reading newspapers in the lobby and having proper tea service at 4 o'clock. I got room 314 on the 3rd floor. It was a nice enough space, double bed, small bathroom, and a sitting area with an armchair positioned near the window. The chair was this heavy wooden thing with faded burgundy upholstery. Looked like it had been there for decades. Everything felt solid and permanent, which I liked after staying in too many generic chain hotels. The first night was fine. Jet lag knocked me out around 9 p.m., and I slept through until morning. Met Ava and Archie for breakfast, spent the day walking around town and visiting the Cotswolds, along with other typical tourist stuff. The two of them were exactly like they'd been online. Warm, funny, and great hosts. I was having a perfect time. The second night was when things started. I'm getting ready for bed around 11 p.m. when I hear voices through the wall. Muffled, but clearly an argument. A man and a woman going back and forth, voices getting louder and more heated. I figured it was the room next door, old buildings, thin walls, that kind of thing. But then I realized I could hear it too clearly, like they were in the room with me, not next door. I pressed my ear to the wall and the voices got quieter instead of louder. When I stepped back toward the center of the room, they got more clear again. The argument went on for maybe 20 minutes. I couldn't make out specific words, but the tone was ugly. Real venom in their voices, especially the woman's. She sounded absolutely furious about something. The man kept trying to interrupt her, but she'd just get louder and more shrill. Then it stopped abruptly, like someone had hit a mute button. I waited for doors to slam or footsteps in the hallway, but nothing else happened. Just that heavy quiet you get in old buildings late at night. I mentioned it to Ava the next day and she looked surprised. Said the rooms on either side of 314 were empty when she called to check availability. The hotel wasn't full, so there shouldn't have been anyone next door to argue. That day we drove out to Bath, spent hours walking around the Roman baths and the Abbey. It was a great day, lots of photos, and good conversation. I felt relaxed and happy. But when we got back to the hotel room around 6 p.m., something felt off the moment I opened my room door. My suitcase had been moved. I'm obsessive about where I put things when I travel. Suitcases always go on the luggage rack at the foot of the bed. Toiletries lined up on the bathroom counter in the same order. Phone charger has to be plugged into the outlet by the nightstand. I found hotel housekeeping usually respects your layout if you're staying multiple nights. But my suitcase was now on the bed, and my toiletries were scattered around the bathroom sink like someone had been going through them. The phone charger was unplugged and coiled on the dresser. I called the front desk and asked if housekeeping had been in my room. The desk clerk checked and said yes, but just to replace towels and empty the bin. Nothing that would require moving luggage or personal items. I rearranged everything back the way I wanted it and went to meet Ava and Archie for dinner. We had a great evening in the gastropub, stayed out until almost midnight. I was tired and a little wine-buzzed when I got back to the hotel room. I noticed right away that the chair had been moved. The burgundy armchair that had been positioned by the window was now sitting in the middle of the room facing the bed. I stared at that chair for a full minute, trying to make sense of it. Maybe housekeeping had moved it to vacuum and forgot to put it back. But who vacuums after hours? And why would they move a heavy chair to the center of the room? I dragged it back to the window and went to bed, but I kept staring at it in the dark. Around 2 a.m., I heard the voices again. I could tell it was the same couple, with the same angry tone, but this time I could make out a few words. The woman kept saying something about money and lying, and how she couldn't trust him. The man's voice was defensive, but getting angrier. The argument built to this crescendo where they were both shouting, and suddenly I felt it hit me like a physical wave. Pure, irrational rage. I had nothing to be angry at, but something felt like it was being poured into me from somewhere else. There was this fury at being betrayed, humiliated, taken for a fool. I was swallowed by this hatred so intense it made my hands shake. I sat up in bed, sweat beading on my forehead, and then the voices stopped. The rage lingered for another few minutes before gradually fading, leaving me confused and exhausted. The next morning, my toiletries were scattered again, and the chair was back in the middle of the room. That's when I asked Ava about the hotel. She had heard it used to be apartments, built in the 1920s as luxury flats for well-to-do residents. It was converted to a hotel in the 70s, when the apartment business went under. I'm not sure what to make of that, but it would explain a married couple arguing over money, I think. The fourth night was the worst. I'm lying in bed around 1 a.m. when I hear footsteps pacing back and forth across the room. Heavy steps like someone wearing boots. But when I turn on the bedside lamp, there's nobody there. The pacing continues even with the light on. I can hear floorboards creaking in a steady rhythm from the foot of my bed to the bathroom door and back. Then the chair starts moving, gradually, like someone's pushing it inch by inch across the carpet. The wooden legs make the soft scraping sound as it moves from the window toward the bed. I'm sitting there watching a piece of furniture move by itself, when that rage hits me again, but stronger this time. Overwhelming fury mixed with desperation and fear. Like someone was trapped and panicking, and taking everyone down with them. The emotions were so intense I started crying, which freaked me out because they weren't my feelings. I was scared, not angry, but my body was reacting to emotions that belonged to someone else. I grabbed my phone and called Ava, told her I needed to leave the hotel right now. She didn't ask questions. She only said she'd pick me up in 20 minutes. I threw everything into my suitcase and waited in the lobby until she arrived. I slept on the couch the last 2 nights of my trip and told them I'd had a bad reaction to something I ate. Ava mentioned later that when the hotel was apartments, it faded from its luxury status in the 60s, and it was more for people who weren't well off. She said her grandmother remembered rumors about domestic violence and drinking problems among some of the residents, and that she would see the bobbies there all the time. It was the kind of place where people stayed because they couldn't afford anywhere better, and took their frustrations out on each other. I think that room had a couple who hated each other, but couldn't escape. Based on the feelings that came through, I wouldn't be surprised if one of them finally snapped completely. Maybe that kind of rage doesn't just disappear when people die. It soaks into the walls, and waits for someone sensitive enough to feel it again. I've taken the Blue Line home from downtown at least 3 nights a week for the past 4 years. And I've never talked to a stranger on the train. Not even once. I'm not antisocial, just tired after long days of fixing other people's computer problems. And I like the quiet ride to decompress. But last Thursday night, something made me break that rule, and I still can't explain what happened. I was leaving the office around 11 p.m. after dealing with a server crash that had kept half our accounting department offline all day. It was one of those problems that should take an hour, but turns into an 8-hour nightmare because nothing works the way it's supposed to. By the time I got to the Clark Lake station, I was exhausted and looking forward to the 20-minute ride home to think about anything except error codes and backup protocols. The train was mostly empty, which happens sometimes at that time of night. There were a few late shift workers, maybe a couple of people heading home from bars. You know, the usual mix you see after 11 p.m. I grabbed my regular spot near the middle of the car and was settling in with my phone when I noticed her. She was sitting about 6 seats away, facing toward the front of the train. A young woman, maybe early 20s, sitting perfectly straight with her hands folded in her lap. What caught my attention was how she was dressed. It was this early vintage style that looked straight out of the early 70s. She was wearing high-waisted jeans, a blouse with puffy sleeves, and had long straight hair parted in the middle. She even had one of those crocheted vests that my mom used to wear in old photos. My first thought was that vintage fashion was making a comeback, and I just hadn't noticed. I mean, I work in IT and spend most of my time in khakis and polo shirts. So what do I know about style trends? But something about the way she sat there, so still and formal, made me keep looking. She seemed lost in thought, staring out the window at the tunnel walls sliding by. There was something sad about her posture, like she was carrying some heavy weight. Normally I'd mind my own business, but for some reason I felt compelled to move closer. Not to hit on her or anything. I've been with my girlfriend Amy for 3 years, but I had the strange urge to make sure she was okay. I moved to the seat directly across from her and cleared my throat softly. She looked up with these really pale blue eyes and gave me a small smile. "Long night?" I asked. "They all seem long lately," she said. Her voice was quiet, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Midwestern maybe, but old-fashioned somehow. We started talking. It was casual conversation at first. I told her about my job, mentioned the server crash that had kept me late. She nodded like she understood workplace frustrations, said she worked as a secretary downtown but didn't specify where. "It's good to have steady work," she said, "especially with everything that's happening." I figured she meant the economy, inflation, you know, the usual stuff people worry about. But then she started talking about her boyfriend Tommy, who got drafted and was overseas fighting in the war. She hadn't gotten a letter from him in 2 months and was starting to fear the worst. That's when I got confused. I wanted to ask which war she meant. Afghanistan ended years ago, and there wasn't any major conflict going on that would involve a draft or anything. But she seemed so genuinely worried that I didn't want to sound insensitive. "I'm sure he's fine," I said. "Communication can be spotty in... Wait, where's he stationed?" "Vietnam," she said simply. "Been there since January. He was supposed to come home for Christmas, but they extended his tour." I stared at her for a moment. Vietnam. The war ended in 1975, almost 50 years ago. Maybe she was talking about some family history, or got confused, or was speaking metaphorically about something else. I wasn't really sure. But she kept talking like it was current events, mentioned protests on college campuses, how divided everyone was about the war, how she worried about getting one of those terrible telegrams. She talked about waiting by the mailbox every day, hoping for letters that weren't coming. The train pulled into Fullerton and a few people got off. She kept talking and I found myself drawn into her story despite the confusion. There was something genuine about her worry, something that made me want to comfort her, even if I didn't understand the context. "I keep having these dreams," she said, looking directly at me. "Dreams where I'm floating in this dark place, and I can't find my way back to where I'm supposed to be. Do you ever feel lost like that?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I'd been having my own struggles lately. Amy and I had been fighting more. Work was becoming monotonous. I felt stuck in a routine that wasn't leading anywhere. Like I was just going through the motions without any real purpose. "Yeah," I said, "more often than I'd like to admit." She nodded knowingly. "Sometimes I wonder if this is all there is, just waiting for something that might never come, going through the same motions every day. Maybe the dreams are trying to tell me something." We talked for another 10 minutes about feeling trapped, about waiting for life to start making sense again. She was surprisingly insightful for someone so young, and I found myself opening up more than I usually do with strangers. The train slowed, approaching Logan Square, when she shifted in her seat and I noticed something on her left wrist. A thin scar, maybe 2 inches long, running parallel to her palm. Not a fresh cut, but not ancient either. It was the kind of mark that tells a story you don't want to ask about. The doors opened and an older man got on. He took a seat near the front of the car. He was wearing a hospital uniform, probably heading home from a night shift. He glanced over at us, then he looked away. I was about to ask the girl her name when she said something that made my blood go cold. "I think maybe the dreams are right. Maybe I am lost, and this is just my way of trying to find something real before I have to go back." "Go back where?" I asked. Before she could answer, the man in the hospital uniform stood up and walked over to us. "Hey, buddy," he said, looking directly at me. "You feeling all right?" "What do you mean?" I said. "You've been sitting here talking to yourself for the last few minutes. Thought maybe you'd had too much to drink or something." I looked at him, confused. "I'm talking to her," I said, gesturing to the girl. The man followed my gesture and frowned. "Talking to who?" And I turned back to point at the girl, but the seat was empty. Completely empty, like no one had been sitting there at all. And I looked around the train car. There was the man in scrubs, a couple of teenagers with headphones, and an elderly woman near the doors. The young woman in vintage clothes was nowhere to be seen. "She was just here," I said. The man looked at me with concern. "You sure you're okay? Want me to call someone?" I shook my head and told him I was fine, just tired. He went back to his seat, but kept glancing over at me like he was worried I might have some kind of episode. The train pulled into my stop and I got off, but I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. It had felt completely real. Her voice, her expressions, the way she moved her hands when she talked. I could remember specific details about what she'd said. I could even picture that scar on her wrist. When I got home, I did something that I don't usually do. I went online and started searching the news to see if something was happening in Vietnam that I hadn't heard about. I found a lot of history stuff, but nothing recent. That probably sounds dumb, but I'm not always up to date on current events. What happened felt so real I figured I must have missed something. I'm still haunted by that conversation, how she knew exactly what I was going through without me having to explain it, and that she seemed to understand something about feeling trapped between where you are and where you're supposed to be. I've taken the same train every night since then, and I keep looking for her. I keep hoping I'll see her again so I can ask her name, find out what happened to Tommy, and understand what she meant about going back. Then again, I'm kind of glad I haven't either. because I'm not sure I want to know what it means when someone who might not exist knows more about your life than you do. I started working maintenance at St. Mary's in January 2021. It's this old Catholic church downtown built in 1923. Solid brick, beautiful stained glass windows, the kind of place that makes you whisper even when it's empty, which it usually is during my shifts. I work weekdays, and I'm mostly alone except for Mrs. Santos, the secretary who's there in the mornings. The first weird thing happened maybe 3 months in. I'm in the sanctuary replacing some burnt out bulbs in the chandeliers, and I hear piano music. Nothing crazy, just someone playing hymns. I figured Mrs. Santos was practicing or something, so I kept working. But when I climbed down and looked around, nobody was there. The piano bench was pushed in, cover closed, and the sanctuary was empty. I mentioned it to Mrs. Santos the next day, and she just shrugged. Said the old building makes all kinds of sounds, heating system settling, wood expanding and contracting. I figured that explanation was good enough. I didn't think much more on how that could be confused with piano music. Guess I was just looking for any rational answer at the time. But it kept happening, always Tuesday afternoons around 2 p.m. Same gentle piano music, usually lasting 15 or 20 minutes. There were always hymns, played slower than you'd hear during service. The melody was familiar, but I couldn't place it. This went on for months. I'd hear the music, go check and find nothing. Eventually I stopped checking and simply worked around it. The church has thick walls. Maybe sound was carrying from somewhere else. Then in September 2021, I'm cleaning the basement fellowship hall after some church event left it a mess. Folding chairs everywhere, tables covered with leftover cake and coffee stains. I'm down there alone, working my way through stacking chairs, when I hear footsteps upstairs. There were these heavy steps across the sanctuary floor. I waited a few minutes, figured whoever it was would announce themselves or leave. The footsteps stopped right above where the piano sits. Then the music started. This time I crept upstairs real quiet, came up through the back hallway so I could see into the sanctuary without being seen. The music was definitely coming from the piano. I could see the keys moving, but nobody was sitting at the bench. No reflection in the polished wood, not even a shadow, nothing. Only keys pressing themselves down in perfect rhythm. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds watching this happen. The song was How Great Thou Art, but played in this real distinctive style. Lots of little extra notes and flourishes. Then it stopped mid-phrase and everything went completely silent. After that, I noticed even more activity. For one thing, the thermostat in the basement fellowship hall was always getting adjusted. I'd set it at 68 in the morning, come back after lunch and find it at 75. Mrs. Santos swore she never touched it. Father Miguel said he rarely went down there. But every few days it was back at 75 degrees. There was also the church bulletins. Mrs. Santos prints them Friday afternoons, leaves them stacked on the table in the basement for volunteers to fold on Sunday before service. Except sometimes I'd come in Saturday morning to check on something and find them already folded, stacked in neat piles of 50, like someone had spent hours on them. Mrs. Santos started joking that they had a helpful ghost. The piano thing continued through 2022 but got more frequent. It didn't stick to Tuesdays anymore, but random weekday afternoons as well. Always the same song with that distinctive slow arrangement. I started recognizing when it was about to happen. The building would get real quiet first, like even the heating system was holding its breath. In March 2022, I was installing new LED bulbs in the basement when I found this old photo album someone left on one of the tables. It was the parish directory from the 1990s, full of member photos and family pictures. I was flipping through it during my lunch break when I saw this photo of the church piano with a woman sitting at it. She was small, maybe 60 years old, short gray hair, wearing this blue cardigan. The caption reads, Elena Martinez, Music Ministry 1995. I showed the photo to Mrs. Santos and watched her face change. She told me Elena had been the church pianist for almost 40 years, passed away from lung cancer in 2018. Said Elena used to come in Tuesday afternoons to practice. Always ended her session with her special arrangement of How Great Thou Art. She'd also volunteer to fold bulletins when the regular volunteers couldn't make it. And she always kept the fellowship hall warmer than most people liked. Mrs. Santos said Elena had been one of those people who lived for the church. Never married, no kids, spent most of her free time there. When she got sick, she kept playing right up until she was too weak to lift her hands to the keys. The strongest incident happened last month. I'm in the basement around 1:30 p.m., fixing a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink. I hear those familiar footsteps upstairs. Then the piano music starts. But this time I also hear something else, papers rustling downstairs with me. I turn around and there's a woman at the bulletin table, same blue cardigan as in the photo, gray hair and back turned to me. She's folding bulletins with this practiced efficiency, grabbing 3 sheets, fold, stack, and repeat. I can hear the paper creasing, see her shoulders moving as she works. I watched her for maybe 10 seconds before she just faded. She was there and then slowly drifted away like mist. The bulletins she'd been folding were still on the table, perfectly creased and stacked. The piano music stopped at the same moment she disappeared. I don't talk about this stuff much because I never believed in ghosts before, but Mrs. Santos isn't surprised when I mention the bulletins getting folded, or the thermostat getting adjusted. Father Miguel just nods and says some people have a hard time letting go of the places they loved. I still work there 3 days a week. The piano music happens less frequently now, maybe once a month. But last Tuesday I came in to find fresh flowers on the altar, arranged in this really specific way that Mrs. Santos said was exactly how Elena used to do them for special occasions. Maybe that one was a coincidence, but I have a feeling it wasn't. You have been watching Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.